You're righty there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things Oldham related, and welcome to another video from me, Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. In this video, we are going to be tackling the Eldar's answer to Terminators, the Wraith Guard. The Wraithbone core of a craft world is a psycho-supportive environment where the spirits of dead Eldar continue to live in the Infinity Circuit. The many thousands of Eldar whose spirits form the Infinity Circuit exist both as a single Gestalt consciousness and as many individual minds. A single consciousness can separate from the Infinity Circuit and enter a Spirit Stone, which can be placed within the shell of a machine, such as the robotic body of a Wraith Guard or Dreadnought. Both Wraith Guards and the larger Dreadnoughts are psychotechnical robots of humanoid shape. By inserting a Spirit Stone within them, they are imbued with the intellect of a long-dead Eldar and are able to move and act much like living creatures. The consciousness of a dead Eldar exists in a drifting, dreamlike state. To a spirit, the material world is grey and shadowy, whilst the shapes of other spirits is clear and bright. Even the thoughts and feelings of lesser races such as humans are as tangible as steel and stone. An Eldar army may be accompanied by several of these machines, but they cannot operate independently. Both Dreadnoughts and Wraith Guard are dependent upon the presence of living Eldar for their sense of purpose. The mind of a living Eldar is like a bright beacon, a guiding light which enables the spirit to perceive the world around it. Wraith Guard are the craft world's last defenders, living dead who can be awoken in times of great need. If large numbers of Wraith Guard are created, the Infinity Circuit is weakened, so it is unusual for many Wraith Guard to be deployed at any one time. Sometimes roving armies are accompanied by Wraith Guard, but only in relatively small numbers. Wraith Guard are humanoid in shape, but their bodies are incredibly resilient. Even if they are destroyed in battle, chances are that the Spirit Stone will survive within its armoured shell and can be reinstalled inside the craft world's Infinity Circuit. I really do enjoy reading the background lore and fluff that's done for some of the older units back in the 2nd edition codexes. They really added that element of flavour to a unit that just made them that extra little bit as far as I was concerned. And any excuse I get to read them to you, I'm going to take with both hands and go with it. Now then, the Eldar Wraith Guard were apparently done as an answer to Space Marine Terminators. I learnt this from watching one of Josh's Crown of Command podcasts with, I can't remember who it was, and I feel quite bad for that. But if you want to listen to them, I highly recommend them. They're available on Spotify. Just look for the Crown of Command podcasts. They're really good and they're a great source of some background information as well. Anyway, as I was saying, the Wraith Guard were apparently done as an answer to Space Marine Terminators. And when we look at their rules, you can actually see why. Because they're incredibly tough and they have some very interesting rules to their weaponry as well. One of the first differences you notice between the Wraith Guard and the Terminators is that Wraith Guard actually have 2 wounds, whereas Terminators only have 1. They have the same movement skill and ballistic skill, but there is another major difference between the actual Wraith Guard and Terminators themselves, and that is that whilst Terminators have a toughness of 4 and a save on 3+ on 2d6, the Wraith Guard actually have an armour value in place of a toughness, and that is an armour value of 10, and that actually makes a very big difference. For example, with an armour value of 10 rather than a toughness, you're going to be needing a minimum of a bolt gun to actually do any damage to these guys, or anything with a similar armour penetration, because toughness isn't the same in this. So for example, if you're going up against someone like Imperial Guard and they have las guns, where they are again armour value of 10, a las gun isn't going to do anything. But compare that to a Terminator with their toughness of 4, a las gun can actually do something, granted it's on a 5+, and where Terminators have a save of 3+ on 2d6, good luck actually getting through it. But if you throw enough las guns at a Terminator squad, chances are you're probably going to take out 1 or 2 of them, whereas you can throw as many las guns against a Wraith Guard unit as you like, and that's not going to do diddly squat. It would just be like a fresh summer rain to these things. And then another really interesting thing is when you look at their special rules for their armour, that once you've actually hit them and got through their armour, you roll slightly differently for them. You don't roll as you would normally for other troops, where you roll to see if you wound and then they have to save. You actually roll to see what happens to them. So on a 1 to a 2, they just get knocked to the ground and they have to spend their next turn getting up. On a 3 and 4, it's damaged and it suffers a wound, but on a 5 and a 6, it's actually fully destroyed and can suck anybody else into the warp on a d6 roll of 6 inches if they are within 2 inches of the actual model that is killed. And this is a very interesting rule for them. And because of that, I think that actually makes them very, very survivable against small arms fire. You do also have that very interesting rule for the Wraith Guard where it's proximity to Eldar. Now this rule states that you have to have living Eldar actually on the table for the Wraith Guard to function as normal. But it also adds a nice little bit that if you have a Farseer or a Warlock within 12 inches of the Wraith Guard, they can add +1 to any of their shooting to hit rolls. And this is particularly effective since they've got a ballistic skill of 5. You give them that +1 and they're going to be hitting things quite nicely a lot of the time. And then you get to take into account the fact that the Wraith Guard are armed with a very unique weapon called the Wraith Cannon. Now this weapon has a short range of only 16 inches, but it has special when it comes to its strength and damage and armor penetration. Now this weapon's effects are very similar to a D cannon, but the results are more tightly controlled apparently and far more accurate. So with this, what you do is you roll to hit as normal and you take into account all your hit modifiers, everything else like that, anything minuses to hit or anything like that. If the target is a vehicle or a building, the Wraith Cannon penetrates automatically. Roll for hit location, everything is normal for that one. Any other target, it has to take a distort test. So you're not like rolling for their against their toughness or anything else like that. It's just straight, you've hit them, so roll to see what happens. On a 1 to 3, they're outright destroyed. Doesn't matter how many wounds they've got or anything, or what armor it's got, armor saves, you know. You can, again, put that into a Terminator, roll a 1 to 3, oh well, enjoy your 3 plus save on 2d6 because it doesn't count. Bye-bye. But more interestingly, I think, on a 4 to 6, you just move them 2d6 inches in a completely random direction. Now this can actually be very, very interesting, and it can shove the units out into all sorts of spaces that puts them out of where they wanted to be, and can cause all sorts of disruption to their battle plan. So to my mind, at least, when you combine the two facts of the Wraith Guard's armor value instead of toughness, and that this Wraith Cannon has some very interesting rules for it, other than the fact that Terminators actually get more weapons choice than the Wraith Guard do, I would say the Eldar came out on top with that one. And they have got some extremely interesting rules that made them very tough, and I cannot wait to use them in a game. Reading through the rules for the Eldar in this 2nd edition codex really does help to highlight for me why there are a lot of people out there that consider Eldar to be top of the table when it comes to 2nd edition 40k. They've got some really interesting units with some quite powerful weapons, some absolutely gorgeous models, and I'm genuinely enjoying finding out all about these models because I never used them back in the day. So this is a real breath of fresh air and an awful lot of fun. And I'm really actually enjoying painting these as well. Now just quickly, before I go to showing you how to paint them, if you're a returning viewer and you enjoy my content, give us a quick subscribe so that way at least you get notified whenever I actually put up a video. And then you can see them more readily and it won't have to rely on YouTube actually letting you know. And now with that out of the way, let's grab yourself a fresh cuppa, get to the painting desk and see how I've painted these ones. Unfortunately, the initial part I filmed of me correcting the bent barrel on here has been lost because I basically did it quite a while ago when I started. And I've obviously deleted it or lost the footage somehow. So I will recap what I've done. Sometimes, when you buy these models online, because they're old, you'll have the barrels that are bent. And when you try and straighten them out, they can snap. But this bit will stay bent. And if you use a pair of pliers, quite often what you'll find where they're lead, if that shows you there, you can damage slightly the sculpt. So the way I've actually corrected this without doing that is I drilled a hole down the center of it where it had snapped. First I filed it flat, and that hole is big enough to fit the end of a pointed needle file down inside this. Now, I would only advise doing this if you've got a good set of needle files, and because these old models are lead, they'll bend quite easily. So that hole wants to be big enough to stick the end of the needle file down inside it like that. And that way you can use it to actually straighten the barrel up by bending it round. And when you do it that way, it doesn't damage the outside parts like that. And that way, what you've got then is you manage to straighten up the barrel, and you've also got a hole ready to pin the end in. It helps when you've got a nice bigger hole like this. And I use quite chunky paper clips. As you'll see, it's got quite a lot of wiggle room in there. And that is kind of deliberate, and it helps. Because that way your holes don't have to necessarily line up perfectly. Because what you can do is, as you can see, there's quite a bit of movement there. But when you super glue them into place, you won't have that, and you'll be able to put that a lot easier where you want it. And as you can see from this part, where the holes are so much bigger than the actual paper clips themselves, you've got plenty of wiggle room to actually line the end of the barrel up nicely and get it nice and straight. And once you've got it held in place and the glue's dried enough for you to let it go, take some super glue activator. And the best trick I've found to do this is to actually unscrew the lid of the actual applicator bottle itself and use the tube that's on the inside of it to apply the activator to the specific spot that you want to go, rather than spraying it. Because if you spray it, it can go all over the place. And if you do it this way, I find you use a lot less of your activator up and it will last you a lot longer. But you do have to be careful with the bottle, because if you knock it over, you'll lose most of your activator, and that's irritating. And there you go, with it all set in place and that lot, I think we've managed to get that nice and straight and looking pretty decent, ready for painting. Now the next thing I want to do to this one is actually change the position of his head slightly, so that it looks like, well, hopefully so that it looks like he's almost looking down the barrel of the gun. So for that, I have got a razor saw. And this is actually not too difficult to do. All I want to do is cut along there and cut that off and re-glue it. Now just work at it slowly, make sure the blade is lined up. And these old lead models cut quite easily. And I shall come back when I've got that removed, and we'll see what we're going to do next. And there we go, that's with the head off. Now what we're going to do afterwards is we are going to take a needle file, a nice flat one, and I'm just going to try and even out this one, because if it shows up there, it's not the most evenest of cuts, and we want that to be a lot flatter. If you've got a good needle file, it's not going to take very many passes with one of these. Okay, and we're going to have the same on the underside of the head, where it's not exactly perfectly level, perfectly flat. We're going to tidy that up as well. Now then, to make this positioning part a little bit easier, I'm going to glue the head on first into position and get that where I want it. Then we're going to glue on the head. Here we go. That is a collar piece stuck on. Now we want his head to go on next. Now the good thing is, the way we've done this, you can see roughly where it should be. And it's not going to be a huge amount that we're turning this, because it doesn't take a massive amount for this to work. Now actually, one little tip, because we've smoothed off these two surfaces, little tip is to get something that's sharp that you can use to scratch some lines and like sort of roughen this up. Now I'm going to use the point of another needle file. Now I wouldn't advise doing this unless you've got a pretty decent set of needle files, because it can damage the tips. But these ones are pretty decent quality, so you can do that and just scratch along it. There you go. It shows up. There you go. It shows up. I'm just going to score in some lines. This is basically to help the super glue key in. Doesn't have to be excessive. There you go. Now I'm just going to do the same on here. You don't have to be amazingly deep. You don't want to go gouging great chunks out of it. Just enough so it's got something for the super glue to key onto. And then take a little bit of super glue, put it on here. Not a huge amount. If you do think you've got a bit too much on there, you can use any old piece of paper just to wick some away, like that. In fact, a bit of paper is very handy. There you go. You put the head on and then twist it slightly. Then you check the positioning of it, and I'm happy with that. And to make sure it's glued in place, I'm going to take my super glue activator, and like I said before, take it out and actually apply it directly to it with the end of the applicator, like that. So the super glue activator goes right inside directly where you want, and you'll find you don't go wasting so much. And just that simple little trick of changing his head alters the whole look of the model, like how it's actually looking at you down the table. Changes it all, and it's that simple little trick can add a little bit of variety to the, what was it, you had like 3 sculpts, and that was it. So just that, there you go. Got what looks like a completely different sculpt. Now we're going to get to painting it in the colours of the same hand force that I'm doing. We'll be right back with that. The first stage in painting these up is going to be to give them a primer layer, and for that I'm using the High Coat Grey. I'm doing this before I do anything else because these are metal models, and paint can sometimes, can chip a lot easier off metal models than it does off the newer plastic ones. So before I do anything, I'm going to do this step. Where I'm going for the same handcraft world, the main colour of their armour is going to be white. So to this end, over the grey, what I have done is I have applied some Wraithbone through my airbrush. Now, even if you have Wraithbone in a rattle can, I would still personally do it over a grey primer, just because these are metal models and the paint can just rub off if you have to handle the model at all whilst you're painting them, or it can just damage a little bit easier. I mean, you don't have to, but that's what I would do. Now, over the Wraithbone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some contrast paints, Apothecary White, and I'm just going to apply this over the whole model. And use as big a brush as you've got so you don't get any pooling, because over a surface like this, you want to try and get a nice smooth coat. And so the bigger your brush with the contrast paints, the easier you'll find this, because you can just do it in one motion. And for now, I'm just going to go over pretty much the entirety of the armour, and we can work out what areas I'm going to do green afterwards. And there we go, that's with the Apothecary White added. And as you can see, that adds quite a nice sort of off-white colour to it. And the beautiful thing about this colour is as well, that if you happen to get any tea staining or anything, and you get a bit much where it gathers up maybe, is Corax White with GW paint is actually really, really close to that sort of shade there. So if you thin it down, you can glaze over any tea stains and it can cover them up quite nicely. And then the next thing I'm going to do to add some extra definition in is I'm going to go in with my Green Stuffs World size 0, and I'm actually going to paint in contrast paints Basilicanum Grey, and I'm going to do that directly into any major recesses, so like around his knees, finger joints, and anywhere else you can see. So he's got a couple of areas dotted about, and just basically what you want to do is go around and carefully just paint your Basilicanum Grey directly into these deeper recesses, and it just helps to add some definition to the white armour. I mean, we are still going to go in and highlight it as well, and there we go. The Basilicanum Grey has added a little bit of definition to some of the deeper areas. You've got around his fingers stand out a bit better, around his toes, and there's a couple of other joints knocking around as well. The next area I'm going to do is all of the black areas, and there's a few dotted around. I'm going to do all of his gun in Abaddon Black, as well as any pipes or joints between his armour and vents I can find as well. And if you thin the paint down nicely, it will actually be a little bit more easier to control. You use it a bit like a wash, or rather a thick wash. As long as you don't overload your brush for doing areas that are a bit embedded in, it actually helps it to just flow off the brush, and it'll go in those areas a little bit easier. The next bits I'm going to be doing for this are any of the green areas, and for that I'm going to be using Warpstone Glow. This is entirely personal preference where you put these parts, but I'm choosing to go on his helmet, the back part of his gun, his loincloth and his kneecaps. Now, Warpstone Glow is one of those colours that has really bad coverage, so you don't really have to thin this paint down a huge amount to get nice thin coats, but you do want to be patient when you're doing it and not try and get a fully opaque coverage too quickly, because it will go down blobby. So just be patient and apply this coat over a few layers, and then we'll move on to the next colour. We're almost there with the base coats now. There's just a couple more to do, and those are the metallics. And the first one I'm going to do is Retributor Armour for a couple of the gold areas. In fact, there's only 2 areas that I'm doing gold on this. And that's this part of the end of his rifle. And on the back of the rifle, there's some little tiny detailing. On this one, it's just here. I'm going to paint that in gold as well, while trying to still leave that gem black. But it doesn't matter if you go over it a little bit. You can just tidy up the gem in out on black later on once we're finished with it. And the final metallic colour I'm going to use is some Balthazar gold, which I'm going to use on these two sort of, I don't know what you call them, like vents on their back. Again, this is purely artistic choice. You can do whatever you like, really, to be fair. When it comes to washes for this model, there's not that many to do, especially now that we've already done the white armour. So the first one I'm going to use is going to be some Biel-Tan green. And that's just going to go over all of the green areas. So that would be like basically anywhere that you've chosen to do. Since I've already done the helmet, top of the gun, and there's loincloth in that, that's what I will do this in. Then some Reichland flesh shade over any of the areas that you've done gold, which for me is only these couple of bits here. And then for the two brass bits on the back, it's just simply some Agrax earth shade. And that is in fact all the washes we need for this colour scheme. For this colour scheme, we're going for a nice simple tabletop ready. So we're just going to do a one-stage highlight on this, and the first part I'm going to tackle is going to be the green. For that, what I'm going to start with is to reapply the warped stone glow. Now this is going to take several coats to do it, and I'm going to want to leave the darker recesses that have been left over. And like I say, this is going to take several coats to get a smooth finish to it. So don't worry about that. The first coat will look very patchy, as you can see. You don't want to worry about that. You just want to build it up over several coats until you've got a solid layer. The good thing about Warped Stone Glow's poor coverage, though, is that when it comes to areas like fabric, you can actually build up to the level of brightness that you're after quite nicely by just patiently applying the coats and letting them dry, and then applying them over less and less area as you go. The final stage in highlighting this is to take some moot green, and I'm just going to run it along the edges of the headpiece like this. And on the cloth parts, I've just highlighted the creases and the folds in it. And for these little sensor nodes, all I'm going to do is just highlight the uppermost area edge of it. There's a nice thin line like that. Next up for highlighting is the black areas. And for that, I am just going to use some Thunderhawk blue and just pick out any edges that you want highlighted. For these gems, again, the little sensor nodes bits, just try and do a thin line around the edge of it. And for the piping on here, a nice little trick for doing it is to just, instead of trying to meticulously pick out each one, just pick out the very uppermost part of them and just pick them out in little flicking motions with your brush. And what this will do is add that element of it looking like it's shiny. And there we have all of the black highlighted. Now we're almost there. But the next colour I'm going to highlight is going to be the white armour. And for that, we can do a nice simple one. It's just going to be pure white for an edge highlight. What I will say actually is areas like this little bit here where it's made a mess. Remember I said that if you use some Corax white and thin it down, that actually tidies them up and covers it up nicely. So here you go. This is some Corax white, just a little bit thin down. Touch it onto the area. And when that dries, you won't even be able to tell. Now here we go. For the edge highlight of this, some pure white, and you're just going to pick out all of the edges, which there aren't actually too many really, to be honest. And I shall be back when all of that is done. And there we go. That's the white done. And as you can see, that bit there, which I also did earlier, has now blended in very nicely with that. So as you can see, like I said, Corax white over the apothecary white base coat matches it quite nicely. Now the final colour that I'm actually going to highlight is going to be the gold, and for that I'm going to be using some Runefang steel, and it's just going to be a case of pick out the edges of it, and again with these little sensor nodes just paint the top part where you've got the little details here, just paint little highlights on those, some of those, and basically anywhere else that you've got some gold. One of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint all of these gems red, so I thought I'd show you how to do that. To start off with, over the black base coat that I've done, I'm going to take some Mephiston red and thin this down a little bit more than you might normally would, and I'm just going to paint over the whole of it except the very top corner. And the best way to imagine it is where you want the light shining from. It's that top part that I'm going to leave black. The point of thinning it down a little bit more than you normally would is that it doesn't give you proper solid coverage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a second coat of Mephiston red and just do it over slightly less of what I've just done. Okay, so it just reinforces it that little bit more. I'm then going to take a bit of Evil Sun Scarlet and I'm going to paint that on basically a crescent shape around the bottom part of the gem, like that. And then the last colour I'm going to use is going to be some pure white. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a tiny dot of it just up on the bit that we've left black, try and put that roughly in the centre of that. And then I'm going to do a little line covering less area than we did with the Evil Sun Scarlet, just on the bottom there. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and do that to all of these other gems. Come back to do the last bit of painting that's on here. And there we go, that is all of the gems highlighted and painted up. Now there is one more stage to do to make them really pop. That's in the varnishing stage, and I'll show you that in a bit. Now the last bit in painting these ones is going to be these little vents here, and that, I want them to look like they're glowing a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some pure white and thin it right down, and I do mean thin it right down, so the point where it's like very, very thin. And I'm just going to apply it directly into them. And in the muzzle, the barrel, just apply it in there. I am then going to take some of this old paint that GW used to do, which is a glaze paint they used to do called Guilliman Blue. Now, if you don't have this, you can use some contrast paint like some Talisar Blue or something. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply this directly into the vents. It adds a nice blue tint to it. And in the barrel, there you go. That adds a nice bluey tint to it. The final touch to do to these is the vines that Biel-Tan quite often have on them. And for that, I'm going to do these on their loincloth here. And I'm just going to take some Abaddon Black and thin this down fairly well. And I'm just going to paint some tight vines on his cloth here. And I'm going to start just here. And I'm going to start out by painting the lines quite thin, so that they're easier to control. And just be as random with them as you like, really. There's no set colour scheme for it. And then once that's done, I'm then going to go back to them and thicken them up. And then once I've done that, it's a case of painting the thorns on them, which is just little triangles that you're going to paint off vines, just at even intervals over the thing, like do one side and then the other. And there he is, with the same hand decal put on his head, as well as his base done with the Warboss green and that mix of yellow and green sawdust flock that I used. Now, the final little touch to do to this guy to finish him off is I'm going to take some gloss varnish. I'm using GW's Ard Coat for this, but you can use any gloss varnish really. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paint this over each of the gems like that, and this will add a real element of shine to these. And then once you've done that, that is your Wraith Guard all finished up. And here we have all 5 of the Wraith Guard finished up. That simple trick of cutting off the head and repositioning it can add quite interesting variety to the unit, considering there's only 3 or 4 different sculpts to the actual bodies. And that can make them look quite dynamic, really, by the time you're finished with it, for basically a relatively small amount of work. That white is also quite clean and quite easy to do, so I hope that's of use for some people out there. There's going to be a lot more to come for the Eldar in future, including all of the Aspect Warriors, and some units of Guardians and some Walkers for them as well. So stay tuned for that in the future. And these have been an awful lot of fun to do, and I'm really enjoying the Eldar so far, so I'm really looking forward to the extra stuff coming. And I hope you're looking forward to it too. And with that, that is another unit for my Eldar force finished off. I'm really enjoying painting these guys up, and I do hope that everyone is enjoying coming along for the journey as I build up my Eldar force. In the future, there will be more to come from Aspect Warriors, Guardians, as well as some war machines for them, and I'm hoping everyone will stick around for that as well. If anybody's interested in getting a commission done, there will be a link in the description below to my website, where you can go and have a look at any price lists, as well as some galleries to have a look at some of the work that I've done. Also, if anybody's feeling amazingly generous, there is also going to be a link to my Ko-fi account below there, where people can make as little as a £1 little payment, or subscribe to it and come along for extra details as they get released. If you're watching this at time of release, I really hope you're all having a great Christmas, and I wish you all a happy new year. And with that, stay smiling and keep the old hammer alive.